Hi guys and welcome back. In this video we're going to learn about arguments and parameters, which we can use to make our functions generic so that we can use them with multiple different pieces of data. Let's say you've got a car dictionary that contains some information about a car, such as the make, model, the mileage, and the total amount of fuel it has consumed over its lifetime. You can calculate the miles per gallon, which I know is quite a British thing to be calculating, as the mileage of the car divided by the total amount of fuel consumed. Let's imagine that this is a unit in gallons. You can also get the name of the car as the make and the model. So I'm going to create a F string with the make and the model. Finally, we can print something like this car does this number of miles per gallon. If we run this program, you'll see that there's nothing new here. You get Ford Fiesta does 50.0 miles per gallon, and that's all well and good. You know, you can actually put this into a function if you wanted to call this specific code many times. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a def statement such as calculate mpg and the colon, and what this does again is it creates a new function called calculate underscore mpg, then the two brackets at the end, the colon, and all the code inside the body has to be indented. So I'm pressing the tab key when I select all of these lines, and that's going to indent them all. It's going to add 4 spaces in front of each line. Now that we've got that, we can call this function so that it will run. So by pressing run now, the same exact thing will show up because we haven't really changed anything. All we've done is we've put this into a function and then we've called the function which runs the code. So it's the same as before, but a little bit longer because we now have to create the function. If all you wanted to do was this, you don't need a function for it. So we're going to make this function a little bit better. We're going to change this function so that it doesn't always use this data. We're going to change it so that it can use any arbitrary piece of data that we pass to it, given that it has this structure. So I'm going to take this car out of the function, and I'm going to put it on top here. Let's say that. I'm going to make sure to unindent it so it's all good. Now, if we run this again, this will still work. And that is because when you go into the function, and you try to access the car variable, notice that it's not defined inside the function. So Python realizes that maybe it's defined outside the function. So it goes looking to the next block, which is the main application. And it can find the variable there, so it uses that. So that's all well and good. This still works. But once again, we're limited by always using the variable out here. So what we're going to do is we're going to put something inside the brackets. We're going to put is car to calculate. And then inside the function, we're going to use this variable name instead of car. So I'm just going to expand this a little bit so it's a bit easier to read. What we've got now is that inside the function, we're using this thing called car to calculate. And that is inside the brackets. So what does that mean? Well, it means that when we call this function, as we do here, now we must pass in some data, such as this dictionary, and the value of this dictionary will go into this, which is a new variable that we are creating when we start running the function. So all I'm doing here is I'm calling the calculate mpg function, but now I am passing in a value. I'm giving it what's called an argument. And this argument here is what gives a value to this parameter. So the value you pass into a function is called an argument. The variable that receives the value is called a parameter. So if we run this right now, we can delete this variable, by the way. The exact same thing will happen because now we are running this function and we have this car to calculate variable, and when we run the function we are passing this dictionary into it. So when the variable accesses the mileage property of this variable, we're accessing this thing here. And when we access the fuel consumed, we're accessing this thing here. This is all well and good, But we are still limited by one thing, which is that we've got this single variable that we can use to call that function. So let's make this program a little bit better. Instead of passing the dictionary in here, we are going to create a list of cars. So here we have a list of cars. We've got the first car, which is the Ford Fiesta that we were using earlier, and then we have another one, a Ford Focus, a Mazda MX-5, and a Mini Cooper. Now we have 4 cars in here, so we cannot do this. The reason we can't do this is because if we put the cars list inside the brackets, the value of the cars variable, which is this list, will be assigned to this parameter. And then when we try to access the mileage property, it was trying to access the mileage property of this list. And again, lists don't have this sort of access. You would have to access element 0 or something like that if you wanted to access a list. This is only applicable to dictionaries, as we know, so we have to access one individual car of this list. So we can calculate the MPG for cars 0, say, and that will once again give us the Ford Fiesta. If we change this to cars 1, that is going to give us the Ford Focus. If we change it to cars 2, it'll give us the MX-5. So this is the perfect place to use a for loop. If we make a for loop for car in cars, then instead of passing cars 0, 1, or 2, we can just pass car. And that is going to print out one line for each car, as you can see there. Something important to know is that this variable car to calculate can just be renamed to car. And I appreciate this will be a little bit confusing. But here's what Python does when it encounters a variable. Here we're using the car variable. So the first thing Python is going to do is it's going to check whether it was declared in this body. And in this case, it was, because it is the parameter. So because car was declared here, it will use this one. If we have another car variable declared up here, then this one will still be this parameter. It will not use this one here unless there is no variable defined there. Then Python will check here, it won't be there, and it will go to the next level. So your variables can take the same name as something that's declared above if you want. It's generally discouraged to do that, so do it with a bit of caution. Here I'm doing it because this car variable that we're declaring inside this for loop is used down here as a sort of temporary measure, so I'm okay with calling this variable car. But sometimes if you have global variables that you want to keep as unique names, you can do that and you can call these variables something else, such as car to calculate. It's really your choice. In this case though, calling it car makes the code a little bit simpler because the other variable name was a bit long. So this is how arguments and parameters work. We've learned how to pass an argument, which is passing a value and putting it inside the brackets, and that the value of this variable will be assigned to this parameter. It can have the same name, and that's totally fine. And if you want to have multiple parameters, such as something like car and intro, say, such that you can print the intro there, then you define them like this. You put one parameter name first, and that is going to be a new variable that gets created when the function gets called, and then a comma, and then another variable that will be created when the function gets called. Now this function needs 2 arguments because it has 2 parameters. So down here, you can pass in after the comma an entirely new argument that will now be the value for intro. So this will be the value of that, and this will be the value of that. If we run this, you'll see that every car prints new car in front because that's the value of intro. Hopefully this makes sense. I hope I haven't confused you too much. Functions are going to come in really handy as we develop. And indeed, whenever we're making longer pieces of code, it's often a good idea to split different parts of them into functions so that the code is a bit more readable. Something very important about functions is giving them a name that describes what they do so that when you read the code that uses the function, you can very easily tell what it's doing. If you're not sure what to call a function, don't worry, it's the same thing as naming a variable. It takes time and experience to get really good at it. Thanks for joining me in this video. Hope you've learned something, and I'll see you in the next one.